Hey everybody, today we are going to be talking about the first 5 presidents of the United States. After the Constitution was ratified, George Washington was selected as the very first president of the United States. He did not have any easy task ahead of him. There was a lot of issues in the United States when George Washington became president that he had to figure out on how to solve. So today we're going to talk about what were the issues that George Washington had to solve, how did he go about solving them, and what were some of the big events that happened during George Washington's presidency. So let's first start talking about the issues that George Washington faced as the very first president. Now, being the first president, he was faced with a lot of different issues. The United States wasn't really organized or under control yet. And the biggest issues he faced as a new president was, number one, there was a war between England and France, and that had begun already. And so Washington had to decide what was his foreign policy? What was his plan of how to treat this war between England and France? Does he choose a side? Does he not choose a side? So what is his decision in that? Number two issue that he had to face was there was lots of financial problems. Now, it was a really big issue in the country. For example, there was all different kinds of money. So like different states had different kinds of money. So instead of seeing like a dollar bill that you see today, each state would kind of have like their own type of dollar bill. And this created a lot of different chaos, and really the financial structure of the United States was pretty messed up and pretty chaotic. So he needed to figure out, how do we solve that problem? The third big issue was showing power of the national government. Because remember, in the Articles of Confederation, the national government was not that powerful. And so George Washington had to show, okay, now that we have the Constitution, our national government is a lot more powerful, and you have to listen to the national government now. It is the boss. It is the boss of the country, and it runs the country. So those are the big issues that George Washington faced as being the very first president. Now, this is obviously not a very easy job for just one guy to do. So George Washington, to help him figure it out, and to help him solve these problems, he created a cabinet, but not this. Instead, he created a cabinet, and what that is a group of guys, including the vice president. And they would give the president advice, and they would help him run the country and solve the country's problems. This was one of the precedents that Washington set, that even up to today, Obama, he continues to do what Washington did. So Washington was the very first president. He was the first one to create a cabinet, which is a group of advisors to help him. And every single president after Washington has copied that same idea, and that's called a precedent. Now, talking about the first issue, the war between France and England, Washington had to figure out, what was his foreign policy? How was he going to treat this whole war between England and France? Was he going to pick a side or not? The cabinet had a lot of different opinions. Hamilton said, do not pick a side, stay neutral. Jefferson said, you need to pick France because they helped us in the Revolutionary War, and it's only right that we take care of them because they took care of us. Well, after quite a bit of time of thinking, George Washington finally decided that his foreign policy would be neutrality. So he decided on the way of Hamilton by not picking a side. So he just said, we're not going to help either side, or we're going to help either side equally. We're still going to trade with France and England, but we're not going to send them any troops. We're not going to help them anything that has to do with the military. We're going to stay neutral. Now, to deal with the financial issue in the country, Washington turned to his cabinet member Alexander Hamilton to solve the money problems that were in the country. And Alexander Hamilton created a 3-part plan that was to help with all the financial chaos, all the money chaos that was going on. So his plan was, number one, he wanted to pay off the national debt that we received from the Revolutionary War. We had to borrow money in order to fight war. That's very true for every country who fights in war. They typically have to borrow money and therefore in debt. Well, in order to pay off debt, the government needs money. And the best way for a government to get money is to tax something. So Hamilton's plan was to tax whiskey and people who made whiskey. The third thing was to create a national bank, because by creating a national bank, everything becomes more stable, more secure. You can create a dollar bill that's true for every single state, so not every single state has their own dollar bill. And it's all very unified, it's all very together, and it helps create a lot less chaos and solve that problem. So this was Alexander Hamilton's 3-part plan: pay off debt, tax whiskey, and create a national bank. Now, overall, Hamilton's plan was a pretty great one to solve the financial problems, but he could not have guessed that after taxing whiskey, a bunch of farmers would get really, really angry about it. And they would say stuff like, "Do not tax my whiskey. I'm going to get my boys and I'm going to rebel." So, really, the whiskey tax, it started a rebellion. And it came to be known as the Whiskey Rebellion. Now, this whole rebellion thing kind of turned out to be a good thing because one of the big issues for George Washington was he needed a way to show that the new national government made in the Constitution was a lot stronger than the national government made in the Articles of Confederation. So what he did was he brought his troops. So Washington brought troops and showed the power of the national government. And when he showed up with all of his national troops, all of the farmers who were angry and rebelling, they just ran away. So right then he shows, okay, national government's not messing around anymore. They're the top dogs. What the national government says goes, and nobody can argue against it. So the national government is a lot stronger. Now, Washington's presidency was all about these three major issues: his foreign policy on dealing with England and France, dealing with the financial issues in the country, and showing the power of the national government. But when he was president in his 8 years, he also noticed that there was some things going on in the country that he was a little worried about. So before Washington stopped being the president, he wrote a letter to all of the people in the United States. And in this letter, it had four major warnings. Number one, stay out of long-term alliances with other countries. So this is like alliances when you say, okay, we got your back, we're your friend, don't worry, we got you. But think about what Washington was worried about is the fact that if, let's say, we were alliance with England, if England fights with another country, that means we have to go fight and support England and help them out when we're not the ones who caused the fight in the first place. So Washington was saying, stay out of alliances because they are just going to drag us into war. The second thing that was really important to Washington was that we pay off the debt that we were in and then we stay out of it because he knew that it would just cause trouble for us. Third thing, he did not want us to divide because of our differences in the country, what we know as sectionalism. So he didn't want us to divide and the North be feeling differently about the South and the South be feeling differently about the North. He wanted us to all stay unified as one strong country. And the fourth thing, he did not want the country to create political parties because really what this does in the end is it just ends up dividing people and they get angry with each other talking about how the government should work. And that's what a political party is. It's a group of people who believe that the government should work in a certain way. So these were his four big warnings. Stay out of long-term alliances, pay off the national debt, don't divide because of the differences in the different parts of the country, and don't have political parties. These are all the big events and decisions made by George Washington. Our first president was a good one, and he set a lot of things up in the country that have been followed for a really long time. He also said some stuff that we probably should have listened to a little bit better, and it would have probably made our country better today. He was a fantastic president for us. Hope you learned something about George Washington.